You might have moved on, but I'm still thinking about that time Donald Trump's poop thoughts reorganized the entire military via tweet. To refresh your memory, on the morning of July 26, 2017, just before 8 a.m. local time, former President Donald Trump released 3 tweets that banned transgender soldiers from serving in the military. These tweets took everyone, including the generals and military experts he had allegedly talked this over with in the Pentagon and Department of Defense, by surprise. In fact, everyone in his administration was pretty surprised. His then press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, had a tough time communicating why this decision had been made and how it was going to be implemented. But then everyone just let it happen. Thousands of active duty soldiers who had happily signed up to serve our country at home and abroad were removed from their position by a guy who said he couldn't serve his country in 1968 thanks to a rather conveniently timed medical diagnosis of bone spurs in his heels that nobody can seem to prove ever actually happened. I can't stop thinking about this moment in time because, for me, it highlighted what made Donald Trump's administration so dangerous. As the President of the United States, he was also the Commander-in-Chief, but he was also someone who thrived on Twitter, bypassing whoever his press secretary was at the time in order to speak directly to the world. Whatever he tweeted completely consumed social media discourse and the attention of the news media. Numerous commentators and politicians noted that his tweet seemed to be in direct response to whatever the talking heads on Fox News had said the night before, in a kind of cyclical wish fulfillment. He didn't have a unified strategy except to do whatever the last person in the room told him to do. These 3 tweets also highlighted the confusion around what happens when the most powerful person in the world tweets every errant thought he has dozens of times a day, especially when those tweets could be interpreted as directives. In fact, it was later that same year, in November 2020, that the Department of Justice made the case successfully to a federal district court judge that his tweets did indeed represent official statements of the President of the United States. Once again, everyone just went along with it because there really wasn't much case law or precedent around whether a sitting public official could use their personal social media accounts for official use, or they were more of a public forum for private opinion. The implementation of this tweet as policy was spotty at best throughout the remainder of his term, as highlighted by a time in 2019 when the Secretary of the U.S. Navy decided not to interpret one of Trump's errant thoughts as a formal order to act. If Donald Trump had really intended to change military strategy on that day in July 2017, the president normally takes that matter directly to the military, not to Twitter. It put us in one of many unprecedented situations where Trump seemed to accidentally discover that people would do whatever he wanted. At the beginning of his numerous runs for president, it was clear to those inside and outside the party that he was running for prestige, not position, to get his name out there, for the free publicity that being a candidate for president afforded you. This resulted, as you may remember, in the rest of the Republican candidates not taking him very seriously, which allowed him to spout off whatever would get him the most media attention completely unchecked. Everyone assumed he would lose, including, from what sources have said, Trump himself. So it came as a great shock to everyone, including him, that he not only became the nominee, but won the whole election despite losing the popular vote by nearly 3 million votes, thanks to the archaic Electoral College whose agrarian roots continue to have a chokehold on our modern-day system of governments for some reason. What resulted was 4 years of an administration that seemed to be building a presidency in the air. Few involved knew how the government functioned. Even fewer seemed to understand why it functioned the way it did. But in that confusion, one thing became clear. Donald Trump could do whatever he wanted because nobody told him no. Because as long as everyone did what he wanted, they, 1, got to keep their jobs, and 2, he would pretty much sign any bill or appoint any Supreme Court justice the politicians or Fox News told him to. They had a blank check, and he had the world's attention. Everyone got what they wanted. His first year in office alone resulted in at least 27 instances where his tweets turned into policy or official action as the rest of the government and bureaucracy struggled to keep up with his changing whims. This resulted in racist travel bans, alterations to government contracts, and even worked against himself by criticizing the renewal of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which the White House had been pushing to pass. So what would happen if you gave someone like that, a person who has realized the only limits to presidential power are hazy boundaries that few seem willing to enforce if tested, bolstered by the fact that Supreme Court just basically told him he could be king if he sat in the Oval Office again? What if you gave someone like that a plan and the willing, waiting infrastructure to carry it out? That's called Project 2025. It's an initiative from the Heritage Foundation, which is a far-right conservative think tank that you might have heard of if you're watching the Republican National Convention. Noticed that this year, they're the ones getting top billing. They want you to know this is their party now. Project 2025 is a roadmap to massively overhaul the form and function of the federal government, roll back protections for the people, places, and things that call the United States home, and it's something you need to know about as you consider who to vote for this November. Here are some highlights. Project 2025 seeks to formally remove the separation of church and state and elevate Christian nationalism as a focal point. They seek to implement a Bible-based system of government overseen by what they call Christian ordained civil magistrates. Project 2025 seeks to eliminate the Head Start program, cut free school meal programs, almost completely cease enforcing civil rights in schools, expire an $18 billion fund for low-income students and put those responsibilities on states, and, of course, eliminate the Department of Education, which would remove standards for education in public schools. What does that look like? Well, let's say you live in a state that continues under the current standards of education, where children are taught accepted scientific doctrine, like evolution, or history, such as the slave trade was bad. If you ever have to move to a different state, your children might suddenly be forced into a school system overseen by a state that teaches creationism over science, puts the 10 Commandments in the classroom, that slavery was good, actually. Oh, and also Moses was a founding father. Project 2025 seeks to end same-sex marriage and wants to remove protections against discrimination based on sexuality or gender identity. So if you're voting for Trump in November and you have children who are gay, you are voting for an administration that explicitly believes that your children should be able to be fired from their job, kicked out of their homes, kicked out of school simply for who they are. Project 2025 has explicitly stated that those who produce anything they consider to be pornography should be criminally prosecuted. As a reminder, we're currently dealing with a year-over-year scourge of book bans, where everything from Everybody Poops to Captain Underpants to And Tango Makes Three have all been banned as inappropriate reading material for children. We've seen books teaching sex education or personal hygiene be categorized as pornography and taken off the shelves, which is another reminder that we don't actually have any kind of legal metric for what is or isn't pornography. So this kind of vague entry in Project 2025 is terrifying. I've only scratched the surface of what Project 2025 hopes to change about American life. They have plans to raise taxes for low and middle income Americans, build up a nuclear arsenal, roll back funding and protections for journalists, promote a broadening of the death penalty, allow law enforcement to discriminate against minority groups, and oh my various gods, if you're a person who can become pregnant, wait until you hear about the Department of Life. Suffice to say, if you are not a straight, white, wealthy, conservative, Christian man who identifies with the gender on his birth certificate and is also willing to throw away almost everything we've learned about science, sociology, psychology, and ethics in the last 500 years, you're in this. They're coming for you. And if you don't think it's you, go read it. It's publicly available, and they're proud of it. Hope this helps.